Hi, I'm Sara Marks. I'm the author of Love From Northanger Parks, Katie, the fourth book in the 21st Century Austen series. Today, I'm going to share some commentary and annotations from my perspective of this book. Let's start at the beginning. Growing up in South Florida, you go to Disney World every so often, but not a lot, unless you live in Orlando. We lived 4 hours away in Miami. My first trip was in 1981. I was 5. This was only a few years after the park opened, and I had no idea what was going on. We would go a few years later when Epcot opened. It was a notorious trip. In high school, I would go to Orlando every winter and visit a different theme park. In those days, this is the 90s and early 2000s, those parks would be dead over Christmas, and we practically had the park to ourselves. Those days are over. After I moved to Massachusetts, I stopped going to theme parks. It wasn't as easy to get there. It was no longer a priority. There were other places I wanted to see and other theme parks I wanted to visit. But that changed when my sister moved to California. In 2017, over 15 years since my last visit to any Disney park, I went with my sister and her friends to Disneyland. I'd never been to Disneyland before. And still, it was like going back to my childhood, just a little different. I remembered my favorite rides, characters, and experiences that had once meant so much to me. And then there were the things I'd never ridden before because they simply didn't exist in Florida. This happened 6 months after I published Modern Persuasion, and I was finishing up Pride, Prejudice, and Pledging. At that time, I thought my next book was going to be more of a romantic mystery. Missing Augie still hasn't happened yet. Probably won't for this pen name because it's much more mystery than romance. Anyway, I was trying to make sense on the romance side also of what would eventually become Love and War in Woodhouse Hall. And I was looking for an idea for the fourth book. Once in the park, it took shape really quickly. Northanger Abbey, which is the one I modernized for this, is sort of perfect to modernize around a Disney experience. My take on Northanger Abbey, specifically, is about a young woman who becomes so enamored with the idea and a feeling for love that she sees it at every turn. She wants to be part, in the original, of a gothic, haunted romance story, and she lets her imagination run away with her. Mix it in with a little mistaken identity. It's such a fun book. Honestly, I think it's the most underrated Austen book. Mostly because few people read it, but also because it is just her being snarky about that gothic romantic book thing that was going on. It was the thing at the time. The Brontes were it. But so was Radcliffe, and they were all very gothic. Not Austen. Anyway, there were a few problems with Northanger Abbey. One, it is barely a romance story. It's really women's fiction. It's about Catherine and her life, and the romance is framed as little more than a crush that could have been more. But it was nipped in the bud by this controlling father. His controlling father. Her parents are delightful, mostly because we never interact with them. Tilney coming to Catherine to profess his love at the end is an afterthought. She just did it. That was it. He comes, he's broken with his father, and now let's get married. I knew if I was going to modernize the story, the love story had to be far more central. The original idea was for Katie to fall in love with a Northanger executive. Sorry, I lost my place. Okay, the original idea was for Katie to fall in love with a Northanger executive. I was going to be far more critical of her silliness and rush to fall in love than I ended up being, partially inspired by Austen's snarkiness. But that's not how romance stories work. She was going to be falling in love with falling in love, and she would get lucky that he loved her enough to give up something for her. But that's not how romance works in my brain. That's just not, that was not going to cut it. There was another competing idea for this book, the haunting community. I was going to co-write it with my friend Christy. The idea was hers. She's a true believer in hauntings and ghost hunting. The Tilneys were going to be the center that's manipulating the true believers. We had started the research. We had thought about characters. We were doing character profile and a little drafting. I had gone to San Diego and done research on haunted houses and what would Ethan be like in a haunted house. But the more I thought about it, the more I wanted to do Disney. Of course, I couldn't do Disney because Disney. If you've ever interacted with Disney professionally, you know. A year later, I had a plan that was closer to what became the eventual first draft. At the time, I decided to go to Miami to promote Pride, Prejudice, and Pledging. It had just come out. It made sense in my mind, to drive 4 hours from Miami to Orlando, all alone, to spend a few days in Disney World. I was going to meet some friends, don't worry. We were going to do the not-so-scary Halloween party, but this was really a lone adult trip, just what I wanted. That's when I started thinking about the research I needed. And I understood I couldn't use Disney itself. The hoops you have to go through to get permission, it's more than I could afford or even care to do. So it made sense for me to create my own theme park, but to not make it too complicated that readers would understand it's Disney. That meant I had to know what was happening behind the scenes so that I could make it feel authentic, even though it wasn't Disney, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I could learn a lot from YouTube, but that was nothing like a behind-the-scenes tour, which I did on this trip. And that is what set everything in motion for the plot. At that point, it had been a very loose plan. But as I spent time in Disney World, Epcot, what I still call MGM Studios, because that's what it was when it opened, Animal Kingdom, the Magic Kingdom, with my friends, on my own, I could hear Ethan in my head. His excitement to share what he knew was so much what I had loved about the original Henry Tilney. Every other version of this character that I had come up with seemed far too cynical. But this, Ethan, he was delightful. From there, Katie and Hannah fell into place. 3 characters that had been developed since the ghost hunting plot were Bella, Lucas, and Senior. They got to remain the same. They were our villains. I just changed the context. I'm going to be honest, I loved creating my own theme park. I considered the stories and the fairy tales that Disney had not claimed yet. But I also looked to legends and everything that was in the public domain. Yes, there was a point where I was going to get very meta and include Jane Austen characters as potential royals, or at least characters within the park. There were elements I knew I wanted to continue in similar ways. Pin trading, which I had found delightful. Mini ears, but different. I wanted to do the similar events, the similar programs. I wanted to be upfront that this was a Disney dupe. I knew I wanted to connect with readers who love Disney. So mirroring those experiences is what I wanted to have happen. And thus I did a lot of research to continue through YouTube videos, because there's so much Disney content on YouTube. It made it really easy for Hannah and Ethan to have a YouTube channel because I could see what kind of content they were covering. And I saw what Disney fans did for related content that wasn't necessarily about them walking through the parks. So let's get into the chapters. Chapter 1. I wanted to run as fast as I could through the park. I wanted to have a Sound of Music moment. You know, the one where Maria stands on top of the Alps, throws her arms wide open, spins in circles, and sings about the hills being alive. That was how I felt when I went to Disney World alone in 2018. It had been nearly 2 decades since I had last been in Disney World, the Magic Kingdom. I had already done Disneyland with my sister, who Katie was named for, and had fully re-embraced my love for Disney. But being in the Magic Kingdom, the first park I ever visited, was like coming home. Also, I was an adult traveling alone, so I needed Katie to feel similarly because she too was an adult pretty much traveling alone. So who is Katie? Katie is a woman who's just happy to be here. She knows she's privileged, but has no entitlement to it, but probably some entitlement. At the same time, she doesn't say no. She can be rash. Obviously, that's the plot, but she enjoys life. She has no expectation of meeting Hannah and Ethan in the park, even though she knows they're there. But if she does, she's not going to give up the chance to hang out with them. So when she meets them, she doesn't give up the chance to hang out with them. If they only gave her 5 minutes of their time, she would have been thrilled with that. If you got to read Hannah Plays Cupid, the short story prequel that goes with this, you know there's a lot more going on here. There are details Katie doesn't know, and Hannah isn't going to turn Katie away. As soon as Ethan hears her screen name, he knows who she is. But Katie doesn't know she's been chatting with Ethan in the comments of their videos. So if you haven't read Hannah Plays Cupid, go for it. You get a little bit more of a perspective on what those two were thinking when the story started. But back to chapter 1. When watching videos on YouTube about Disney parks, there are a lot of themes. I got the impression from some of them that they did a lot to keep up with content. And I knew Hannah and Ethan were going to have to do the same. This meant a lot of them had to be in the parks all the time, or spend a lot of their time in the park recording chunks of content that would become multiple videos. If they were in the parks all the time, they very often had to live close enough so that they could go often. And those who lived farther away from the parks and created content really seemed to struggle and may have traveled far more than they originally expected to keep up with the demand for new content. One guy I watched even move to Orlando while I was watching him because he was going to the park so often, and it was a business for him. And so when I thought about who Hannah and Ethan had to be and how much they needed to be in the park and how that I was going to justify that, them working for their father as travel agents and his business, not them directly being the travel agents, but them helping to create the content, really made a lot of sense. I know as a viewer, those videos always made me want to go more often than I ever had before. I could feel that FOMO, the fear of missing out on events, merch, food, and more. And it quickly becomes something you're deeply engaged with. So when I saw content creators move or just stop making videos because they were getting sucked in so quickly, I understood what they were feeling. And I got a sense of why Ethan and Hannah might sort of be stuck. Chapter 2. Since this book has a mistaken identity element to it, there had to be some setup for that. In the original, Mr. Tilney, the father, not the Henry Tilney, thinks Catherine has money and thus makes her more valuable to him, which is why he invites her to come to Northanger Abbey. Not for Henry, for himself. But I needed something better, because that makes no sense in this day and age. Senior, who we meet later, is a man who never passes up an opportunity to make himself more important or valuable. Do Ethan and Hannah mislead their father after what they learn in this chapter? I don't think so. Their father hears what he wants to hear, but this is where it's set up that he's going to hear what he wants to hear. It wasn't hard for me to imagine Ethan's excitement to talk about Katie and her uncle when they're in the parks and talking with their father later. It would so easily be misconstrued by his father that they were far more important to the Parks than Ethan was letting on. Or Ethan was making them seem more important than they really were. Ethan's joy in talking about the parks and teaching Katie about how it works was an opportunity to explain the park I had built. Katie isn't ignorant, but she enjoys seeing how things work. And Ethan could have easily come off as mansplaining the park to her, but she's enjoying it because she's attracted to him. I had to be very careful to not have him do this to everyone or repeat information or talk down to her, which would have worn thin very quickly for everyone, especially Katie. Katie's position as a fan of Hannah and Ethan's content makes it a little more complicated, even though Hannah has plans for her. The siblings are in the park to make content. They're not there just for fun, which means there's a chance for Katie to be on camera herself. Not necessarily intentionally if she didn't want to, but it's really easy to just find yourself in someone's video. Katie doesn't think about it and what she needs to decide or what the camera might see quickly or what other viewers will think. She's excited to be included. Even small content creators fall victim to that parasocial relationship that causes problems, especially when fans encounter them in the real world and the wall of the video screen, phone screen, tablet screen is dissolved. One of the details I considered with Ethan was something I've seen in YouTube videos, especially when there's an attractive person involved in content creation. Viewers want access to that person. If they're not in the video, they want to know where they've gone and why. If they've left the channel, people want to know what they're doing now. If they go on vacation, they want to know where and with whom. Ethan suffers from that problem. Not that he wants to know, but everybody wants to know about him. This is part of why he's kept his identity a secret in the comments. And Katie doesn't know who she's been chatting with. He's trying to keep his boundaries up while still being engaged. When they interact with viewers in the park, Katie has a moment of worry that she's no better than these women. Of course, she quickly gets lost in her fantasies about their possible future and marriage and everything, but she has a moment where she recognizes that these women are just like her. The nice thing about creating my own version of Disney also was that I could change any rule I wanted. Disney might do something, but Northanger does. Chapter 3. Obviously, Katie and Ethan need to spend as much time together as possible. Obviously, they have to learn about each other if they're going to fall in love. A direction will only take you so far. The reason to have dinner with Terry and Michael is so that others around them can see this shared attraction and, on Katie's end, encourage her to pursue it. When the camera isn't on, Ethan has no reason to pretend to be interested in Katie, but she amuses him, and the attraction is building, and it's forming into something. Between everything being a ride for Katie and her love of French fries and salad, he just finds her delightful. The frustration for readers with one point of view is that they don't get to know what Ethan's thinking. I assure you he is falling in love, but I don't think his inner monologue is something a reader would enjoy. And I do a lot of thinking about this when I approach a book. Sometimes you want to know the thoughts, but you really don't want to be in a character's head. Ethan is really hard on himself. He worries about being too much and that he would disappoint her once they're out of the park. He has all these issues about his father. He's wishy-washy. You'd be in his head and hearing and reading these things far more often than you'd want because they just play on repeat. So, we don't get Ethan's point of view. There will be Ethan content, don't worry. He's delightful. I love him. I love all my heroes. Chapter 4. Daniel, Bella, and Lucas arrive. Now, as I mentioned, Bella and Lucas were holdovers from that haunted storyline that I was co-writing with a friend. So it's time to meet our villains. Which of the Thorpe siblings are the villain? I'd argue Lucas is the problem. Sure, Bella's delusional, but Lucas is really a problem. But I'd love to hear your theories on why Bella's the real villain, if you have them. Once someone asked me if Daniel is on the spectrum, as in the autism spectrum. I didn't delve deep enough into his character, but if you read it that way, that's not unreasonable. I think I write a lot of men who might be on the spectrum, but it's not discussed in the book. This comes because these are the men I dated when I dated actively. And the fact that many people in my generation, which is Gen X, went undiagnosed, especially if they were able to focus and were smart. So I don't know. This just happens to be the type of men I like. And are they on the spectrum? Probably. Bella is the type of woman who can date anyone. As long as she gets to live the life she wants, she'll do the work to get that no matter what it takes. And she'll ignore whatever contradicts her assumptions about her partner's desires. Daniel's not standing up to her. But if he did, would they be together? I don't think they would have made it this far if he was clearer about the type of partner he wanted. Katie is doing her best to include and be mindful of Bella because she loves her brother. But Bella pushes a lot of Katie's buttons. Lucas, she has no fucks about. If he hadn't come, she wouldn't have been disappointed. Chapter 5. Who is worse, Carter or Lucas? I'm going to still maintain Lucas. Carter isn't great, but he doesn't pretend. He doesn't care enough to pretend. He's got the life he wants. As far as he's concerned, if Bella cheats on Daniel, that is their problem, not his. He's going to do what he's going to do. But Bella has a good point about getting things tailored. They just fit better. I would do this if I could afford to. Chapter 6. Another dinner. Dining in the parks is so much fun, so I needed another dinner. Because I do a lot of dinners when I'm in the park, obviously. But I also wanted to show the contrast between the two dinners and the people Katie's interacting with. We had a fun night with Hannah and Ethan, and now we're with Bella and Lucas. We need to see Bella's disappointment because she was not expecting the ring she got. Daniel might not be standing up to her, but he is communicating, and Bella's seeing it's not what she thought it would be. And now we're getting to the point where she can't ignore it. In Northanger Abbey, the Thorpes are in a very different and desperate situation. They think, and this is why I think the Tilneys, or at least their father, was also making the assumption that Catherine and her brother were rich and important. The Thorpes are desperate. And Daniel's going to school, or Katie's brother's going to school to improve their lives. And they're sort of sponsored by very wealthy people. The Moreland siblings in the original seem to have the potential to save the Thorpes, but Isabella especially is always looking for opportunities. In this book too. Chapter 7. Katie and the other people in her group are having very different vacations. Whatever Katie imagined this would be like, it's not happening. Even without Hannah and Ethan in the mix, the trip would not have gone well. A theme park vacation is not restful. It's fun, but it's hectic and it's exhausting. You'll sleep when you're dead, possibly because you'll die after walking 13,000 steps a day for 4 to 5 days in a row. Bella is having one vacation. Lucas is having another. Katie and Daniel are having a third and fourth. I always thought Lucas knew Katie wasn't interested, but he is enjoying harassing her. Anything to get an advantage or to take someone else down a peg. Lucas will do it. He dislikes Ethan, and he can tell Katie's attracted to Ethan. It makes Lucas want to ruin it. If he can't have Katie, neither can Ethan. But Terry is delightful and full of information. She and Katie are a lot alike, which made it easy for them to spend time together. Maybe they should have spent less time together, because Terry is very encouraging, and maybe not in the best ways. This chapter is where the invitation to go to Tampa comes up. The feedback from my original beta readers dinged how Katie should never have agreed to this part of the trip. It's dangerous. She could have been hurt or trafficked. That's not what this book is. My other pen name, definitely what this book would have been. But that's not what this writes. This pen name writes fun, light, romance. But this was a good opportunity to remind them, my readers, that romance stories are also fantasies. If this is a horror book, she would have been kidnapped or trafficked or abandoned or something. But in this version of the world, Katie is an adult with adult money. She does what she wants. But she is also rash. But again, a plot point. There's very low risk for Katie. She knows her privilege to do this. Allows her to not risk being stranded in Tampa for too long. She has money put aside should she need it. She has credit cards should she need them. That being said, you should keep reading if you're worried. This does get addressed. Chapter 8. This chapter does a lot to set up what happens later in the book. Sometimes you have to pause to show things so future events make sense. Daniel is distracted. Belle is disappointed. Lucas is a jackass. We learn later that Lucas is responsible for getting Katie sent home. This is where he learns the information he later shares with Carter. Chapter 9. You should know. This book brings together some of my fantasy universe, which I write under a different pen name, and this chapter starts to introduce some of that. So if you like fantasy, not romantasy, but fantasy, maybe with a little romance, but you want to understand the families that keep getting mentioned, the Northanger, the Picards, all of that, that's where it's happening in the fantasy world. If you want to engage, there's more content. If they want to engage, this is more content for them. The museum was an opportunity to share a little more about the greater universe while also showing Katie more about Ethan's life outside of this bubble that he's in of theme parks and YouTube videos. It's tearing down that parasocial relationship to let her see that he's just a person. While we're not reading from his point of view, he is on his own journey through the book. He's allowed his father to dictate the direction of his life. In his family's dynamic, he's the ignored middle child. Not all middle children are ignored, but many are. He also wants to please his father. Hannah is the princess. Carter is the mini-me. Hannah is the one who helps Ethan, but she can't do things for him because she too is stuck in a crummy situation. Chapter 10. Have you ever planned a trip to any Disney park with a travel agent? I learned about them while writing this book, and I loved the idea of this being a thing. And as I record this, we are planning a Disneyland trip, my niece's first one, and we're going to use a travel agent because they're free. The park pays them a commission off of what you book, and apparently can work wonders if you're flexible. I'll definitely do my next solo trip through a travel agent. Chapter 11. It makes me sad, as I record this in 2024, that so many of the amenities I wrote about that were Disney-specific amenities no longer exist. Things like a shuttle from the airport to the park. But they still exist in Northanger Parks. The pandemic changed everything for the real Disney. I started the research for this book in fall 2018 when none of us had any idea what was coming in a year and a half. Chapter 12. We finally get to meet Senior, who has no time for his children. When they're in the park, they're his employees. They're there to do his bidding. And a lot of this chapter is obviously based on Epcot and my experiences in 2018. But I have to admit, I have a very complex history with Epcot. So the first time we went, when Epcot opened, my sister got pink eye. Katie, the namesake of Katie. She was like 4. She got pink eye. The second time I went, which was not actually the second time I went, but memory, it was my senior year of high school. It was a one-day trip with a youth group as part of a bigger convention in Orlando, and it was Christmas time. Remember, this was back when the parks were dead during the winter holidays. So, empty park, but a cold snap. We are from Miami. Winter in Miami is barely under 50 degrees. I was ill prepared for a real cold snap, and I didn't have enough money for a warmer sweatshirt. So I was freezing all day and into the night because it got dark at 4:30 in the afternoon, and I came home with the flu. In 2018, the next time I went to Epcot after that, I was having massive hip problems and spent a lot of the trip in discomfort. After 13,000 steps a day walking, who would have thought you would exaggerate a hip problem? I had to go to physical therapy when I got back to strengthen hip muscles that apparently were not strong enough. Have there been other trips? Yes, I've done lots of trips, but I don't remember any of the other Epcot trips, even though there were many in my childhood. My brain likes to remember suffering in Epcot. Chapter 13. Hannah has only ever dreamed of being able to work for Northanger. So has Katie. So has Ethan. None of them have ever really considered how to make this a reality. For Katie, that Ethan and Hannah help her connect to people who do work for Northanger plays a huge role in how she feels about the siblings. They don't have to do this for her. They don't have to invite her to the park. They don't have to travel with her. They don't have to do any of this. This is part of why she's convinced there's something more between her and Ethan. However, either one of them is feeling, she's not wrong. There is something transitioning from flirtation and desire into affection. Could a conversation fix what's going on between them? This is a question I often ask as I'm writing my books. What would happen if they sat down and had a simple conversation? Would it fix the problem? In this case, no. Ethan's not emotionally ready for anything with Katie. His feelings are strong. Her feelings are strong. But they are a mess. He a bigger, hotter mess when he is not in the parks. This is him at his best. But he's performing still. Katie's being herself. She's quickly becoming ready, but he is still performing. Even if it's an authentic version of himself, it's still not him. What's life going to be like for them when he's not in the park? And he's stuck, and his father's demanding things from him. Ethan has work to do before they can be together. This is also the chapter where Bella reinserts herself, and you can just insert your eye roll here. But this has to happen. Not only because it happens in the original, but this is why Lucas reveals Katie's not as important as Senior has been led to believe, or chosen to believe. Katie can't help Senior with anything. Her uncle didn't take a job. She's not a project manager. They're nothing at this point. If Bella didn't sleep with Carter and ruin things with Daniel and Katie, then who knows what would have happened. But it probably wouldn't have been good for Katie once Senior realized she has no value. And that's kind of coming. Chapter 14. I had a conversation once about the women I write. They're stubborn. I'm stubborn. They won't compromise on what's important to them. Typically, their independence is critical in their lives, and having a partner who loves that about them, just as critical. Here's when Katie expresses that to Bella. In the wake of Bella's betrayal, it serves as a type of mirror moment when Katie sees what's happening around her a little clearer. She doesn't yet realize the impact of that or how she's been living in a bubble for the last week, but she's seeing it. She's seeing that all is not well between Senior and his children. She just doesn't know what to make of it yet. That mirror moment is really the halfway point in almost every story you read or watch. If you go to sort of the middle of anything, movie, book, season of a TV show, you might see a character, your main character, literally looking in a mirror and choosing to do something to change things. And then the whole story changes. Sometimes it's going from being passive and reactive to actively engaged in making what they want happen. This is Katie's beginning of that. Chapter 15. If you go to Disney, do a behind the scenes tour. Really, do it. It is worth whatever amount of money you have to spend to see it. Because you get to, especially if you love the parks and seeing how the parks work, you get to see behind the scenes. It was like 4 hours. My little learning hungry brain delighted in everything. I recorded, made photos, took notes. Some of it's in here. A lot of it's in here. Do it. Also, you get lunch, you get a pin, and you get to go on 2 rides quickly. It was the Haunted Mansion and Jungle Cruise when I did it in Disney World, in the Magic Kingdom. The Halloween party is a critical moment when Katie makes a rash decision, but she thinks she's right, and she is. Ethan wants to kiss her, but he hasn't resolved his own issues. He isn't ready for her to kiss him because he's a mess. I also want to add, Margot and Sebastian are part of the enduring series, that fantasy world, but their stories parallel Katie and Ethan's in a way. They are fated mates, because it's fantasy, who can't make it work in this specific lifetime. Think Athos and Milady in Three Musketeers. No, really. That's what I was inspired by. Margot manipulates Sebastian, and he is rigid in his moral code. What she has done to get to him is something he can't get past. There's a whole bonus story in A Little More Northanger Parks where the pair meet one of the modern Picard cousins and learn about Margot and Sebastian. Now, the tragedy of the couple isn't lost on Katie, but she doesn't see the parallels. But I know them because I wrote them. Chapter 16. Should Katie have kissed Ethan? No. Did she read the signs correctly? Yes. Now, as I mentioned when I was talking about the last chapter, Ethan wants to kiss her, but he hasn't resolved his own issues. His story isn't as far along as hers is. They can't kiss. Well, she shouldn't kiss him. I needed her to understand why he didn't like the kiss, even if she doesn't agree or know what else is happening. In the original, the romance between the couple is an afterthought, but this story is about them falling in love. Katie takes risks. She was going to do this. That is her journey. She's a risk taker. She's rash. Not Ethan. There was never a moment when I thought differently. She was going to kiss him, and it was going to be the disaster it turned into. Every decision Katie's made up to now has been rash, so why should this be different? But also, this is when Senior starts to see Katie is not as helpful as he thought she was going to be. Chapter 17. The trip is ruined. So, it makes sense that the universe should pile it on to Katie. Remember when I said my beta readers didn't like that Katie just up and went to Northanger Parks without thinking about any of the risk? Katie's parents are my beta readers. They have the reaction that the beta readers had. That scene was added because of the feedback from my beta readers. Someone has to be shocked, and it made sense for it to be her parents, especially her mother. Disagree? Agree? Tell me in the comments. Ethan's video was a decision I struggled with, and an interesting one at that. Now, I talked about Katie having a mirror moment and looking in a mirror and it all sort of falling into place. And I've also talked about it in other commentaries that I've done for this series. So our character has this moment to reflect either physically or emotionally or both, because they're looking in a mirror physically. Sometimes the character who has been passive becomes actively engaged. Ethan's journey slightly timed differently than Katie's. So Katie had her mirror moment a couple chapters ago. He's having his now. He is looking at the camera instead of a mirror. He's miserable. He's now seeing it and knows things need to change. Now he's met someone who wants more for him than he's ever wanted for himself. It makes him realize how toxic his relationship with his father is, how problematic he is on these videos, and how these videos make him seem and how people interact with him. Katie prompted this, but they can't get there happily ever after just yet. He still has a journey to finish. He's just at the mirror moment. Don't worry, we're not done. Chapter 18. I almost cut this chapter because it's an info dump. But an info dump sometimes needs to happen, especially to set things up for the end. I needed a few more things to happen for Katie. I needed her to see what was going on around her, the things she just, not even that she didn't notice, but simply couldn't see because either deception or she wasn't there. Also, I couldn't keep the readers in the dark about how everything fell apart. Chapter 19. Now we get our happily ever after. Ethan has spent a lot of time doing a lot of work. But again, we're not in his point of view, so we don't get to see it. We only get to see how it comes across when Katie sees it. And he does a lot of work to not just improve himself, but to set this whole situation into play. He had to get people to lie to her and manipulate. It was worth it, but yeah, he had to do a lot of work. I loved having a chance to introduce Diana Northanger and Rhiannon Picard to readers. The two of them are just delightful together. And they are chaos. Rhiannon is a dragon. She will burn you down. Diana is a Northanger. This is her world. They make so much happen for Katie and Ethan moving forward. Again, read a little more Northanger Parks. There's a whole story about what Rhiannon and Diana do for Katie and Ethan's wedding. But I wanted Katie to see Ethan at his true best, not the YouTube performing, content creating best, but what he has actually learned from all those years of making YouTube videos and bringing in his passion for Northanger history and connecting with people. He's now her equal, and they get to be together, and I love them together. Epilogue. The museum finally opens. Ethan's work is finally complete. We get to see what has and what hasn't changed. I want to say, because this is probably shortly before, it's probably less than a year before Romancing Mr. Tilney comes out when I record this. But Romancing Mr. Tilney comes out, takes place about a year after this epilogue. Maybe 2. So if you're trying to put things into context, because the Northanger Parks, the Northanger Abbey modernizations don't really fit in with the rest of the series yet. That if you're just looking to enjoy the two of them, That's how much time you have between the two, the epilogue of this one and the beginning of Romancing Mr. Tony. Think about a year or two. That's it for this commentary. Thank you for joining me for another one. The next one to watch is Unraveling Carrie Woodhouse, an Emma modernization, and the beginning of the second half of the 21st Century Austen series. I'll see you then. Bye.